people to be happy, you've still got to do something meaningful and, you know, have something that you're working on. But yeah, why does that have to be a job that pays money in the kind of industrialist sort of capitalist structure that we live in today? When I was in my kind of mid-20s, looking at going off and doing my own sort of venture, actually quite inspired by people I was working with at Google like yourself, who I could see were doing the entrepreneurship journey. I kind of, had this desire and to want to go and do that myself. But yeah, it was very much focused on the entrepreneurship journey. You know, the main objective is financial and let's make a business that makes me and investors and employees and people a lot of money. So yeah, really the focus was on looking for a gap in the market and then a product that fills that market gap. Like I wasn't really thinking about it. Maybe even don't go to university, or at least spend some time traveling the world, like find out what you're deeply, truly passionate about and what you're excited to do, as opposed to just following society's journey of finishing high school, going to university, getting good grades, getting a job at a law firm, you know, all the things that I did, just following society's path for you. I would tell myself, go back and find your own path and your own journey and what you're passionate about. Even if you take a purely like normal society driven success metrics of like being a successful financial outcome out of being an entrepreneur, like high school and university doesn't teach you those skills properly. Like you said before, getting in trouble in high school for doing the wrong thing. Being an entrepreneur is all about making mistakes and learning from them fast, but you don't want to be fearful of those mistakes or you're not going to have the same rate of learning.
Welcome to the Awakening Entrepreneur podcast. This show is for entrepreneurs that have chosen to define their life beyond the material. They have followed their soul on a hero's journey towards the mystery of the spiritual. I'm your host, Garrett Ng. Each episode will be learning from awakened entrepreneurs and spiritual thought leaders. They have broken through the mold of being ordinary to extraordinary, challenging our paradigm, shining light to the dark, giving hope when there is doubt. The moment of truth is upon us. It is time to transcend our world from fear to love. Are you ready? Let's go! Hello, welcome to this week Awakening Entrepreneur podcast. I'm really excited to have one of the icons of Australian entrepreneurship, and probably I'm understating saying it's just Australia, probably worldwide. I've had the luxuries of working with Michael Fox, our special guest for this week. I've had luxuries of working with Michael when he was working in the head office of Google in Australia, in Sydney. And we used to play Google versus US Marketing, my marketing agency. And we have Google games and Mario Karts and ping pong and foosball. And we had a lot of fun. But Michael is a smart operator as well. He eventually branched out having his own businesses, including Shoes of Prey, and now with the new business Fable, which I'm sure he'll talk a lot more about. But what's really interesting that intrigued me about talking to Michael is that he's never seen to me as someone that's self-centered or selfish. You wouldn't use any of these labels. He's always generous with his time. He's a very giving person, very kind-hearted person. And similar to myself, like my company is all about happiness, success, and fun. But at the core of it, if really truthful about it, it's still like very egocentric about me. What am I going to get? What is Gary going to create? And when we start to go through this awakening journey, we start to see ourselves as probably like just a tiny speck in the whole universe, and we see the connection to the universe, to nature, to other humans living on this planet, and how we can better serve other people. And Michael has always been an inspiration for me in the entrepreneur world. A lot of wisdom through his blogs and different things that he shared on social, and now he's on his new quest. He had to overcome various dark nights of the soul journey or crisis situation, from personal, from business. And for a lot of the people that may be listening on a podcast that's either going through this difficult journey right now or may come up one day with some of these challenges, I'm sure Michael is going to offer a lot of wisdom through his story on how you can navigate this path that's not often talked about. So, Michael, thank you for having your presence here with us today.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, great catching up with you. Yeah, like you say, I think we met sort of 13 or 14 years ago, back when I was selling AdWords at Google and doing account management. You were still full-time in eWeb. So, yeah, and we've caught up over the years since. And yeah, that's a very kind introduction. It's great to chat to you too. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Wow. So I guess if I want to just give a bit of a context of a snapshot of what is growing up like for you compared to when you first started your venture in Shoe of Prey to now, if we look at 3 different timestamp, what would you say, like maybe in your 20s, what was life about to when you're running Shoe of Prey to now?
Yeah, I think you put it well when you talk about the kind of egocentric approach. I think when I was in my kind of mid-20s, looking at going off and doing my own sort of venture, actually quite inspired by people I was working with at Google like yourself, who I could see were doing the entrepreneurship journey. I kind of had this desire and to want to go and do that myself. But yeah, it was very much focused on, okay, the entrepreneurship journey, that's a fun and exciting thing to do. It's the main objective is financial, and let's make a business that makes me and investors and employees and people a lot of money. So yeah, really the focus was on looking for a gap in the market and then a product that fills that market gap. Like I wasn't really thinking about it anything more than that. And it was, that sort of led on in an area that I was kind of interested in and had some skill sets in. So it was that kind of thinking that led to Shoes of Prey and the idea of starting an online retail business and an e-commerce business. I could see that back in the late 2000s, around 2009 when we started Shoes of Prey, the e-commerce space was growing, and could see that there was this market for custom women's shoes. The people around me were kind of designing shoes in some physical retail stores in Hong Kong and in Asia, and we figured we'd go and take that online. So it was very much a kind of financial sort of egocentric kind of motivation. And then I guess I found over the 10-year journey of Shoes of Prey that it was probably maybe halfway through that journey I started to have thoughts around, what is this kind of doing for the world? Like this is, it might be exciting and fun for me, but what impact is this having on the world? And it's sort of almost like a mini existential crisis, not that bad, but, I was thinking pretty heavily about that, and that sort of prompted us. Actually, I loved a lot of the things that you did with eWeb around, building an amazing culture. So we kind of focused on a lot of that. We had as our kind of core sort of mission was passionately creating happiness. Like we figured through custom women's shoes, maybe we could, help make people happy. But it was, the reality is like fashion is not necessarily an environmentally friendly business. You're trying to create products, create this like psychological demand to get, in our case, new women's shoes every season. It's not at its core. It's not really about making people happy or the world a better place.
Wow, that's profound insights, because when I started going through that awakening journey, similar insights came. So it's like a lot of marketing involves creating fear that unless you have this, you're not enough. Unless you have this new pair of shoes, unless you have certain makeup, unless you have got this certain technology, you're not enough. You need more. But we know that that's just kind of like a band-aid. Unless internally that they're filled up, it will never be enough.
Yeah, and exactly. And there's lots of great things about our sort of capitalist system that we've got, but I think fashion and some of that marketing is a little bit too at the extreme end of it. Like you say, it's about sort of, trying to create this sort of fake demand for the newest, coolest thing, and a bit of fear of missing out, a bit of FOMO around not getting the coolest thing this season and wanting to feel included by having the latest fashion item. And I don't think that really is. I think it's kind of doing the opposite of making people happy, and certainly not good for the environment, kind of forcing consumption on people that they don't really need.
And what's the process? Was it kind of like gradual that you started to have this epiphany, or was it just all of a sudden you just one day woke up?
It was definitely gradual, and I sort of, in a way, I kind of fought it, because like in my mind I sort of fought those thoughts, because we had at our peak we had like 200 employees, we'd raised $35 million from investors. There were all these sort of things keeping me doing Shoes of Prey. So I didn't necessarily, I acted on it a little bit in that we, tried to build a really strong positive culture within the team. We set our mission as passionately creating happiness for customers. I actually went vegetarian partway through Shoes of Prey for, ethical and environmental and health reasons. And so we introduced a vegan range of leathers, and, we tried to do lots of good things. We had some environmentally friendly elements of our business in that all the shoes were made on demand after a customer placed an order. So we were kind of making the supply chain much more efficient, which ultimately had less waste than mass-produced shoes. So I looked for things within that fashion model that could be good, and kind of, I guess, tried to focus my energies on that, which I think was good, but just not as good as if we were doing something that was at its core good for the world.
Mm. And now, what would you say is your current outlook?
Yeah, well, I guess when Shoes of Prey was a crazy roller coaster ride, and ultimately, we had to close the business down. It wasn't successful, and happy to go into some of the details of what that was. But it was essentially we just didn't cross the chasm from this core creative consumer that was our sort of niche customer base. We couldn't cross the chasm into the mass market, and so that was obviously a kind of a rough few years, the last few years of the business, trying to sort of pivot and work out a way through. But ultimately, we closed the business down. So then I took 6 months off. So my wife's Danish. We had a little boy and we had a little girl on the way. We went over to spent 6 months in Denmark. I'd been living in Los Angeles with Shoes of Prey, and we were on our way home to Australia. So went and had 6 months off in Denmark. Just took time out being a dad. And it was like the first proper break. I'd gone like full tilt with Shoes of Prey for 10 years. It was the first kind of proper break that I'd had in a decade. And I probably, I was suffering from like a mild version of PTSD after, having to lay off 200 people and people's visas tied, in US visas tied, a lot of Australians over there tied to the company, and all sorts of challenges with helping the team navigate through that. Not being able to return money to investors. It was a challenging last couple of years of Shoes of Prey. So I think I needed the kind of break for my mental health too. So.
Yeah, if people don't understand it, like sometimes if you raise a whole bunch of money, you're thinking, hey, it's other people's money. But I know when I'm doing it, it's almost like you treat the capital even more important than your own capital. So it's like for someone that like you that's really caring about the investors and your staff and stuff, I know it must be extremely challenging. For me, letting even one staff go is the most difficult issue. That's why like for me it's like get someone else involved, because like that part is too difficult for me.
No, I'm very similar. Yeah, that was tough. So I kind of needed the break just to reset, and it was great. It's kind of one of the best things I think I've done in my life. Like just 6 months off, being a dad, new environment to explore. So there were lots of new kind of things in being in Copenhagen on the other side of the world, and then I just had a lot of time to read. So I just kind of ended up reading all sorts of different books, kind of wherever my intellectual curiosity went. And I guess I had in the back, I wasn't forcing myself to think through what I was going to do next, but I kind of had in the back of my mind, well, I'll do all this reading and I'll try.
What were some of the books you were reading?
Yeah. So, quite a few different books. I read a book by Johan Hari called Lost Connections, which is a really good book about sort of the mental health, some of the causes behind the mental health crisis we sort of have in our society today. Basically, the thesis is we live in a very sort of lonely way in our society. We don't live in this way that we've evolved. As humans, we evolved living in communal
in tribes,
structures, exactly, small villages. We had deep personal connections with a small number of people around us. Whereas today, we literally live in apartments, literally the word apart from and you might live literally less than a meter from somebody else and not even know their name, meter through your apartment wall. Like it's just not how we evolved. And I think that leads to it. And this book kind of talks through that lead is probably the base cause of a lot of our kind of the anxiety and depression and everything in our society. So I found that book fascinating and got really passionate about the idea of wanting to help kind of reduce loneliness and maybe look for something there. So that was an area that interested me. And then, as I mentioned, I'd gone vegetarian actually nearly 5 years ago now. And I'd been eating all of the plant-based meat products when I was living in LA. So Beyond Meat, Impossible Burgers, all of those sorts of things. And then I was living in Copenhagen, eating all the meat alternatives there. So as a consumer, I had this interest in this category and this desire to help, kind of want to reduce society's meat consumption. So actually one of the books that went on my shelf here, this book, Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. This is the book that finally sort of turned me vegetarian. So I think I'd been reducing my meat consumption for about a decade before that. Then, read this book and it just lays out the case. Like after reading that book, I just couldn't.
What would you give, like if you have to give a 1-2 minute summary of that book that kind of tip you over the edge? What was it?
Yeah, I think it's basically three things. So from a health perspective, we eat too much meat. So Australians eat 110 kilograms of meat per person per year. One of the leading causes of cancer is bowel cancer. You literally don't get bowel cancer if you eat a plant-based diet. Like it's caused by a lack of dietary fiber. We eat too many calories from meat, so we're not getting enough dietary fiber. Huge prevalence of bowel cancer in our society, which just shouldn't be the case. Thousands of people dying from that every year in Australia. and a whole bunch of other health reasons why we eat too much meat. There's a very strong case for eating no meat at all, or at least, maybe 10 to 20 kilograms of meat per person per year versus the 110 that we eat on average in Australia. So health was a big one, is a big one. Then environmental sustainability. So animal agriculture is the second leading driver of greenhouse gas emissions, only behind electricity production. Actually, more greenhouse gas emissions come from animal agriculture than come from all of transport combined. So all the cars, planes, ships around the world produce less greenhouse gas emissions than animal agriculture. So, we have one of the biggest impacts we can have as individuals on our greenhouse gas emissions and contribution to climate change is to reduce or eliminate our meat consumption. And then the third thing is the ethics around meat production. And, most meat around the world now, most animals live in factory farms and live a pretty horrific life in those factory farms, a short, horrific life. And it just, the example actually that came out of that book that really struck me was, I had a pet dog growing up and, we loved that dog. We spent thousands of dollars on vet bills and things for that dog. A pig is just as intelligent as a dog. Actually, a lot of studies show pigs are more intelligent than dogs. Yet we treat pigs awfully. If we treated dogs in the same way that we treat pigs, you'd literally go to jail for it. Like our society says, we're going to treat dogs well, but yet we treat pigs horribly. And there's actually no logical reason. There's an emotional reason. We feel emotionally connected to our pet dog. We don't feel an emotional connection to the pig that lives in the factory farm. We just buy the pork in a piece of plastic wrapping at the supermarket. But just logically, it makes no sense. So that thinking through that sort of thought scenario, on the ethical side also turned me around. So there's really just some really seriously major good reasons to not eat meat, and that book covers them off really well.
So it's kind of like I guess growing up in the Western type of thinking, especially the way that you've described your career up to this point is very logical. And even reading that book, I would say, is extremely logical to go a certain way. But sometimes when the student is not ready, the teacher doesn't appear. We read that book and we get it. But but for whatever reason, it's the right timing, and to the right person, it has such a strong impact. And I think when it's the right divine time, we've kind of been driven in that direction. And it's not just that book or speaking to one person. It's a whole series of hints and clues that's been dropped along the way to say, Michael, come over here. This is the right path.
Yeah, 100%. And prior to reading that book, I'd probably reduced my meat consumption down to about a third of what it had been growing up. I grew up in Queensland eating steak and beef mince for dinner every night. I was a big meat eater for most of my life, really. And then over a decade, I'd cut that back to about a third, just because I'd talked to a few people, read a few things, had a bit of a, like you say, a bit of a sort of understanding of all of this. And then, that book kind of solidified it for me. But then actually, I read that book whilst I was doing Shoes of Prey, so it didn't lead to any career changes or anything like that, because I was still doing Shoes of Prey. It prompted me to launch a vegan leather line, because I felt bad about all the animal leather that we were using in our shoes. But it was then the next phase of it for me was that taking that 6 months off. I read more about industrial animal agriculture and a lot of the data behind it and figures, and just got even more passionate about, I'd had this sort of bubbling away thing that I wanted to do. Whatever I did next, I wanted it to be sort of good for the world and do something positive for the world.
Do you also get a chance to, in that 6 months, to just be instead of do?
Yeah, 100%. I wasn't actively looking for what I was going to do next. That wasn't sort of at the forefront of my mind. It was in the back of my mind, but it was really just, hey, Michael, take 6 months off, be a dad first and foremost, and then just go wherever your intellectual curiosity takes you, do whatever you feel like doing, whatever you're interested in. And it was just kind of exploration as opposed to setting out on a path to try and work out what I was going to do next.
And what was that 6 months off, especially for the first few weeks? Was it kind of easy or was it challenging?
That's a good question. Yeah, I probably found it hard to switch my mind off. 10 years of operating, kind of trying to, optimize every bit of my performance and get the most out of my day towards the business. That was a hard mindset shift. But it was probably, to be fair, it was probably helped. I was probably feeling a bit burnt out, so that probably made it a little bit easier to switch it off. But definitely took some time and effort, and it took a conscious decision to go and do that, and to consciously tell myself, okay, Michael, you're taking 6 months off. You don't have to think about work or what you're going to do next. And if I had and I wasn't feeling the pressure, we went to Denmark and We did all of that fairly cheaply. My parents-in-law have a kind of 3-level house. So we sort of lived on one level, they lived on another level, and we had the kind of shared kitchen and lounge room and everything in the middle. So we were fortunate to be able to live kind of rent-free and kept our living costs down to be able to afford to take that 6 months off. And it was really the best thing I've done in my life.
Yeah, I could definitely relate because part of me is like, yep, I want just to slow down. But when I see myself like doing gardening at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock in midday, it's like, shouldn't you be more productive doing like some other things as conquering the world or building new business or something? It's some of the old habits and a thought just drops in. But then on the other side, you got, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm probably now back in, I'm now back in the entrepreneurship mindset, and I'm working the long and hard hours now. But it's in the like service of something that I want to do because it's good for the world. Like I kind of, out of all of that reading and that time out, I was passionate about that idea of 2 ideas kind of really captured me. One idea about wanting to help mental health in society and help reducing loneliness. And the other idea was wanting to help contribute to ending industrial animal agriculture. So I then kind of spent a lot of time exploring, okay, these are 2 things I think would be great for the world. I would love to work on. How can I best contribute to those things? Where do my skill sets lie? And thinking about that, you could try and reduce meat consumption by being an activist. And I think that's a really good thing that some people do. But, I tried to talk to lots of people around me to try and convert them to being vegetarian or vegan. And I think I've convinced like 2 people in 5 years, and I caught up with one of them the other day and he's not even vegetarian anymore. So I'm obviously a pretty terrible activist. So that's not my skill set. But, I had this experience with Shoes of Prey as an entrepreneur, and, while that business wasn't successful, I learned a lot of things out of it and figured I could maybe apply some of those things by starting a meat alternative business. So, if we can produce products that have the taste and texture of meat, but make them out of plants rather than animals, then there should be a market for those products. So I figured that that's where I could best apply my skills. So it's kind of a Venn diagram of, okay, what is something that's good for the world? Where are my skill sets? And then the third piece was, where is there a business model that can work? And it was kind of the overlap of those 3 things. And that worked for starting a plant-based meat business. On the idea around loneliness, that ticked the box, or the Venn diagram was there for something good for the world that I wanted to do. There was, if I could start a business, then that would be my skill set there. But I couldn't come up with the right business model, or a business model that I thought would work. For all the flaws in capitalism, it is also an amazing structure for businesses are an amazing structure for organizing people to go and achieve great things. So I think there's a lot of pros to capitalism as well. And I think that my skill set is as an entrepreneur and as a business person. So if I can leverage capitalism to go and do something good for the world, that's great. But for that to work, there needs to be a business opportunity there. And I just couldn't come up with that for the loneliness concept. So that's kind of what ended up down the path of doing the meat alternative business.
So tell me about Fable, your new business.
Yeah, so I moved back to Australia in December 2018 with this idea of wanting to go into the meat alternative space. Actually, I should even rewind a fraction. My initial thought was I'll go work for another meat alternative business. So I wanted to go do the meat alternative thing. I didn't quite feel ready to go and start another business myself after the roller coaster of Shoes of Prey. So I went and talked to all of the plant-based meat businesses and cell-based meat businesses in Australia, talked to some international companies about potentially launching them in Australia. But the category was just still so new. Everyone in Australia was a startup. They were maybe hiring the odd food scientist or food manufacturer, but they didn't need a washed-up entrepreneur. And all of the international companies launching in Australia were just using distributors, not hiring people on the ground. So there basically weren't any jobs. So I wanted to go into this category. There were no jobs. So, all right, I'm going to have to start another business. So
and for those that are not clear on what plant-based meat is, can you just share a bit on that?
Yeah. So it's basically creating foods that have the taste and texture of meat. Like, you'd be forgiven for thinking that they were meat when you're eating them, but they're made from plants, or in our case, mushrooms, rather than animals. So no, you don't need to kill an animal to make it. So yeah, decided to start a plant-based meat business. And the theory behind that business model is that if you can create a food that has the taste and texture of meat, then people want to reduce their meat consumption. A lot of people are kind of aware of the health issues of eating too much meat, the environmental and the ethical issues, but people still crave meat. Like, if you've grown up eating meat, you still love the taste and texture. I still walk past a cafe cooking bacon and egg rolls and still get that craving for bacon. And just literally for lunch today, I made up some tacos, and I used to put beef on my tacos. I use Fable for the tacos now. I still crave meat. I'll eat tofu and falafel balls and hemp seed patties, but not too often. I don't really crave those foods as much. So the idea is to create a product that has the taste and texture of meat, but make it from plants.
And I don't know whether my experience with plant-based meats is kind of from the Chinese Buddhism type of like plant-based meat. And I guess the industry or the taste and the texture, has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, exactly. So those are some great examples of kind of really early versions of meat alternatives. And there's some decent ones from there. Actually, a lot of use of mushrooms, a lot of use of like wheat gluten to create, really sort of like chicken type products. And there's some good ones there, but yeah, definitely they've evolved, particularly over the last 2 to 3 years. Those products, meat alternatives, are becoming much more meat-like. So I guess our take on the category with Fable, I'm a pretty healthy eater myself. Like, I've been vegetarian for 5 years, and I shop at my local farmers markets, do a lot of my own cooking, bake my own sourdough, brew my own kombucha, all of those kinds of things. And I eat a pretty minimally processed whole food based diet. So I wanted to, if I was going to make a meat alternative product, I wanted to make it out of really natural, healthy, whole food based ingredients. And I didn't want to use any artificial ingredients. And then a lot of the meat alternatives already on the market are like beef burgers and beef mince. So I wanted to go and replicate a different type of meat so that I wasn't competing head to head with the players that already had good products in the market. So those were kind of the 2 points of differentiation I sort of had in my mind for a product I wanted to create. And that came from both my own personal eating habits and then just talking to a lot of different people, watching how people shopped the category at Woolworths. There's clearly other people who thought the same way as me and wanted a healthy whole food based meat alternative and wanted something other than the burger. So set out to explore doing that and talked to a lot of, I don't come from a food background, as you know, so I went and talked to a lot of chefs and food manufacturers and food scientists and different people about this idea and, asking them, would this be possible to create? And quite a few people put me onto the idea of using mushrooms as a base ingredient for a meat alternative. So most meat alternatives on the market today are made from textured vegetable protein, which is usually soy, sometimes pea. And basically, you take the soybean or the pea, strip away the fiber and the fat, you're left with kind of a protein powder, and then you add water to it, high heat, high pressure, extrude it, and you create kind of like a beef mince texture without sort of any flavoring in it. And then you go and add flavors in and you end up with a beef mince. So that's what most meat alternatives are on the market. And textured vegetable protein, it's a very good food, but it's on the there's a bit of processing involved in making it. So I wanted to try and create something that was less processed. People put me onto the idea of using mushrooms because mushrooms are very healthy. They've got a lot of those kind of natural meaty umami flavors already in them. And so I was exploring, is it possible to create a meat alternative out of mushrooms? That led me to meet my 2 co-founders. So Jim Fuller grew up in Texas, fine dining chef for 10 years. Wanted to understand the science behind what he was cooking. So he went and studied chemical engineering and then switched to agricultural science. He majored in mycology, which is mushroom science. And then Jim's worked as a mushroom scientist or a mycologist for the last 12 years. So yeah, chef, mushroom scientist in one human being. And then Chris McLaughlin co-founded Australia's largest organic mushroom farm. Chris was Australian Organic Farmer of the Year in 2018 and Young Farmer of the Year in 2018. So between Chris and Jim, they know everything there is to know about growing mushrooms, the science behind them, how to cook them. And Jim and Chris had actually started working together and had done a little bit of work on making some mushroom-based meat alternatives when I met them. And so, we met earlier last year and, got on like a house on fire, had really good complementary skill sets, similar ideas and vision and mission for what we wanted to create. And so came together and started Fable with the objective of making, healthy, whole food, mushroom-based meat alternatives.
The magic of 3 people to start a business again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was actually just talking about that concept yesterday with one of my business partner. There's 2 of us right now on one of the business, and we suggested maybe we need a 3rd person because a lot of, especially tech company, I've seen the successful ones that have an enduring partnership is the one that have 3 people. That seems to last a bit longer than the 2 people partnership for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I haven't done it with 2, so I don't know, but both of mine have been 3.
Yeah. Awesome. So now that the business is kind of up and running, and where are you sourcing your products from? Are you targeting Australia? Are you targeting worldwide?
Yeah, I mean, our mission is to help contribute to ending industrial animal agriculture for all of those same reasons that I went vegetarian and that are outlined in that book that I shared before. So, yeah, we're not in it to just build a little lifestyle business that would have some pros to it, but that's not going to help contribute to ending industrial animal agriculture in a meaningful way. So, yeah, we definitely want to build a large sort of scaled business to help as many people as we can to reduce their meat consumption. So our initial focus is on the Australian market. Obviously, that's where we're based, so that's the easiest market to get started in. So we launched in December in partnership with Heston Blumenthal, the British chef. He started using the product in the Fat Duck in London and his restaurants. Then we launched into Marley Spoon, the meal kit company. We're now on the menu in about 100 cafes and restaurants around Australia. And then we launched into Harris Farm. That was our first foray into retail. And then we're now also in 600 Woolworths stores. We've got, if you go into the meat alternatives section in Woolworths next to the animal meat, we're in the fridge there with our Fable plant-based braised beef. So yeah, the product kind of replicates braised beef and sort of chunks of braised beef that you can put into a curry or I did it in tacos today, or a bolognese sauce on pasta, make it into pies.
Will you cook it the same way as the braised beef, or slightly like the time and duration, the heat, would it be different?
Yeah, it's like a pre-cooked braised beef. So it's already cooked. So it's actually a bit easier than a braised beef. Comes in a sort of braised beef sort of chunk, sort of piece. So basically you can eat it straight out of the packet. But yeah, the best way to eat it is to kind of fry it off for sort of 5 minutes in your favorite vegetable oil on the pan, and then just put it straight in your curry sauce or your bolognese sauce, or melt a piece of cheese on it, put it on a burger. Yeah, so it's basically ready like a pre-cooked braised beef.
I'm going to go out to look for it straight after the podcast.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, appreciate it. And then we're doing some ready meals, and we'll launch into Woolworths in a month. So a kind of ready meal, a beef stroganoff, Rogan Josh, and a chili con carne. And then launching into Coles in October. And then, yeah, we've got some bigger sort of QSR, quick service restaurant chains that we're launching in late this year and early next year. And yeah, just basically trying to get the product out into the market, get as much distribution as we can, get the product in all the places where people are eating and shopping for food, just give them a delicious, healthy meat alternative option.
So let me ask you a question. Now that you've gone through a lot of the life journey, what would you tell your kids? What is life about?
Yeah, very good question. And you know what? I think having kids was also part of the kind of awakening journey for me, reflecting on the kind of world that my kids were being born into and where that world is headed, and wanting to do my bit to help make that world a better place for my kids and grandkids. But definitely having kids was I think a part of that journey. So when I think about what I want to tell my kids that I do or that I did, helping to end industrial animal agriculture is probably the best thing I can think of that I would want to work on, and to be able to say to my kids that I helped contribute to ending that. I sincerely hope, and I do believe that it's hard to pick the time frame, but I'd say somewhere around 15 to 20 years time. So maybe around 2035, 2040. I think most of the meat that we eat come from plants rather than animals. I think that change is going to happen pretty quickly.
Wow.
The reason that people eat meat, number one is taste and texture, and number two is price. So to get people eating plant-based meat, we've just got to win on those two things. And I think, let me know when you try the product. I'd love to hear your feedback, but I think we're almost there on taste and texture compared with braised beef. Like we did a lunch in December, served a Fable lasagna that a chef cooked up to 60 people. We didn't tell anyone. They just ate the lasagna. No one guessed that it wasn't beef until we told them.
Wow.
It's like 0 out of 60. And so I think we're there, or at least almost there, on taste and texture. And then on price, meat is incredibly resource intensive to create, which makes it expensive. So beef in particular, it's shot up in price over the last couple of decades because we've got limited land. We can't really grow any more beef, and we're eating more and more of it. We're exporting a lot of it to Asia as the population there gets wealthier. So beef's gone up and up in price. We make our product out of mushrooms and plants. They, use like 95% less water, like in the 90% less land. Far more efficient and less resource intensive to produce, which makes it cheaper. So even that we're not at scale yet, we're kind of 9 months post-launch, and we're already matching the cost of braised beef. So we get to any sort of scale, we're going to be cheaper than the cost of braised beef. So if we can beat braised beef on taste and texture and beat it on price, there's just no reason to eat beef from animals anymore. Like, well, plus we're that's not even including that we're healthier, more environmentally friendly and ethical. Those are just added bonuses. If we can win on the two biggest things, which are taste and texture and price, there's no reason to eat beef anymore. And I think this is going to happen in every meat type. Plant-based meats are going to win on taste and texture and price. Actually, I think it's probably less than 15 to 20 years, but I'll be a bit conservative in my forecasts and stuff.
Yeah. Wow. I look forward to see what happens. So going back to your kids, you tell them about like what your life is about. What about them if they're looking for guidance? Either they explicitly ask, like, what should we aim for life, or just every day when you're mentoring? Because I guess in the way that we've been brought up, especially in the Asian part of me, is like make money, like acquire more, like first class, like nice cars, big house. But now we're talking about smaller house, smaller footprint, and less consumerism. And so what would your advice to them? Like, what is life about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I guess my kids they're turning 4 and 2 in October, so I haven't had deep philosophical discussions with them yet. Most of the books we read are about the walking through the forest or the...
But the books that I'm reading, I'm finding that even like, especially the princess stories, it's like, okay, unless you marry a prince, then it's no good. Like, unless someone is good looking, it's no good. But then it's like trying to mold their minds and the type of TV shows that they watch, and like you need to be pretty and you need to be like a certain archetype, and whatever happens is perfect. But like if I'm not clear, I don't even know how to steer them.
And you know what? You just made me realize. I just said one of the types of books they're reading about the animals on the farm. And I do a plant-based meat just trying to end that. I need to go through and review the propaganda that they're reading in these kids' books because it doesn't actually align. I hadn't really stopped to think about that. No, good point, Gary. Yeah, I need to go away and think about that. Oh yeah, how old are your kids?
They're 11, 9, and 4.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Hey, how do you approach that with them?
2 years ago, I started homeschooling them, and I started unschooling. Unschooling is the equivalent of not teaching them anything and just let them be free range. And I started something called like cosmic schooling, which means that rather than just looking at world schooling, look at the whole cosmos, like how the universe is being created, understanding different dimension of consciousness. And for me, homeschooling become more of a co-learning process. I'm learning just as much as them schooling me, because every time, like we look at kids in general, they're happy like 15, 20 times more often than adults. Yeah. And so, well, if you ask most of us, what would be life about? Is about being happy, right? Or even having a meaningful, rich life, living in the present moment. But yet, most of us is so busy in the human doing that we in the past or in the future. So we always skip the present. In the present, that's why when we say like do nothing, it's so difficult. It's like, it's one of the hardest thing for people to do. Like if you ask them to go to a retreat to do nothing for 7 days, don't talk to anyone, it's the most challenging things that most people tell you that they have done in their lives. I mean, probably more difficult than going to a concentration camp. But for the kids, I'm learning to tap into my heart a lot more these days, or my intuition. In the past, it's always the head. But the moment I realized that, hey, let's try to have no thoughts. Well, a thought still comes in. Well, if I'm not controlling the brain, then all these thoughts are flowing in, whether it's from myself internally, subconscious, or is it flowing from energy, source wave, or powers around. Whatever the reason is, like I just become more aware of these things. And if I become more aware of my thoughts, then I look at, okay, well, the kids are happy. Let's try not to screw them up. Let's try to not to domesticate them the old ways. So the unschooling, in a sense, it gives them more freedom. It measures things from an academic level. You say, hey, they're not as advanced in maths or English or science or some of these other things. And if you look at them from the old standard, hey, they're acting out, they're acting silly, they're not focusing. But geez, every time they act out, is they showing that even my 11 years old, you may say that, hey, you're 11, you're still like acting silly? Like what the hell? But dude, he's still acting like a little kid, which means he still kept his spontaneous, costless joy. Whereas for us, if we force ourselves to act silly and have fun and then for no good reason, just running around the yards and laughing at something silly, it's so hard for us to regain that ability. So I'm learning from them, yet I acknowledge that there's certain things practical things in this material world that they need to learn. You can say that you need to learn how to make a living, But I think the certain paradigm that we live in, where based on the fiat currency and inflation and debts and all this other stuff, in 10, 15, 20 years time, they may be living a whole different world. And we know about compound interest and all these other things. If they invested wisely, even from $1,000, whatever, who's to say they actually have to work? Who's to say they can't just grow the investment wisely? I'm not saying that they don't want to work, but similar to you, if they can find their calling, not something they have to do, they need to do because of society demands or whatever, but they just do what they naturally love as their contribution to this planet, as their connection, because you talked about lost connection or something from the book. If we kept the connection to caring about animals, about nature, about people around them and different species, then naturally they're a kind-hearted person. Naturally, people want to be around them. Naturally, if they do something they're passionate about, they will become good at that skill because we give them the flexibility to do what they like. Then they have more time to build on their skills in their teenage years. So potentially they could be a master in that particular discipline. So all those sounds great in theory, but my wife and myself, like most of our friends are not going to homeschool. So who knows, like a year's time, some of them may go back to school. So we're not trying to be the know-it-all and dictate how you need to go, but we try to be in the present most of the time and just evaluate the situation based on the present moment and what will best serve them. But a lot of the stuff about if I'm getting triggered by the behavior, it's like, dude, Gary, you've got some stuff that you need to work on. So they're great teachers.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I agree with so much of what you've said there. Yeah, I mean, I think our kids are going to grow up. If you think about the rate of change in our life, like, when we grew up in the sort of 80s and 90s and didn't even have the internet or mobile phones, and you think about how ubiquitous and critical those are in our society now, and I think that rate of change is only accelerating. Like, our kids are not going to learn to drive a car because they're going to driverless cars by the time that the age of getting their license. And then so much more automation is going to be happening. Maybe by the time they're working age, there's even things like a universal basic income, and there isn't the need to have that many people work. And then I love your thoughts on, people, to be happy, you've still got to do something meaningful and, have something that you're working on. But why does that have to be a job that pays money in the kind of industrialist sort of capitalist structure that we live in today? Why can't it be being an activist or doing something good for the world, or something that doesn't fit with that capitalist structure, but you get paid in another way, whether it's compound interest on investments or universal basic income. And so I agree with you. Like, the existing education system that we have is very much built around actually for the kind of to create factory workers. Like, it's you go to school and the bell rings and you wear a uniform and you sit down in the prescribed place at the prescribed time and learn the prescribed information for 45 minutes, and then another bell rings and you go to the next thing, and then you eat at the designated time. And that form of education was developed in the sort of during the Industrial Revolution to train factory workers, which is not even how we should have been taught, let alone our kids. We're going to send our kids to a Montessori school, which is, I think, kind of a hybrid between going to the level you've gone with homeschooling versus the existing school system. It sort of sits somewhere in the middle. So they still do the curriculum, but it's much more flexible and adaptable to what they want to learn. And
One thing that you touched on is something I'm passionate about as well, is to be able to find hubs of communities. Like, that's probably the beginning, that shares the same value. Because the other day, like, I started mowing the lawn. Normally in the past, like, I would just get people to mow the lawn, but now it's like, hey, well, let's just do some of the stuff yourself. But then I don't have a lawnmower, so I borrow from a friend. But then I'm thinking that the street, almost every single household has a lawnmower. Can't we share like a lawnmower and a bicycle and a lot of these other things, the cars, and we all have one. But if you have a community that shares the homeschooling duties, like there'll be a teacher teaching maths and someone teaching English, someone teaching something else, and then you share the resources, you share the patch of garden, you share different things that, like, man, you share the pets. That'd be so cool. And
couldn't agree more. And I've had this conversation. It's so funny. I've had this conversation with so many people, and this was actually that book, that Connections book. You should read it. You'll love it. Johan Hari is the author. I think it's either Connections or Lost Connections. And the thing that kind of came out of that for me that I would want personally, like, I'd love to live in a structure where maybe it's like 6 or 8 houses, something like that. Every family still has their own space, but big communal yard, maybe a communal pool, exactly as you say. Like, it's so inefficient to have 6 or 8 lawnmowers. You just have one lawnmower, maybe even a shared like laundry space, maybe share the cars, and then have a communal building in the middle with a kitchen, and maybe 2 nights a week everyone comes together, has dinner together. The kids can run around and all play together in the yard. Yeah, like a much more kind of, like you said before, tribe or sort of village type feel to.
Hey, maybe the townhouse estates and apartments, one thing that they've been missing, similar to the companies before, like, well, they don't have the values.
Yep.
You know how, company will have the mission and values? If the apartment or townhouse estates, they state what the values is and define them, man, you attract the right type of people to come. That would be so cool.
100%. And apartment blocks have this. Like, my mum lives in an apartment block in Brisbane. It's got a pool. There's like, 30 apartments in this block, shared pool. There's a shared barbecue down in the middle. There's a grand piano down in the foyer. There's even a home theatre room and a kitchen down in the foyer. But nobody uses it. Like, no, and that mum knows few people in the building, but really not that many. But like you say, if there was shared values and a shared sort of commitment to doing some of those things together, you don't even have to change the physical space. It just, you can have a whole different living experience. Yeah, I think there's so much potential there, and I find that.
Yeah, because I try to Google different places around the world that has this. I'm even was thinking about moving to such a place, but there isn't a lot of places like this.
So one of the great things about being in Denmark was Denmark actually has quite a bit of this. About 1% of the Danish population live in actually quite communal living environments. And my wife's parents are moving into one. So they're kind of getting close to retirement age. So they've just sold their house, and in Denmark, they actually have this legal structure for these places. So it's not renting, but it's not buying either. I can't remember enough of the details to explain it, but it's an actual legal sort of share ownership structure in this building. And it's like an apartment block with a lot of shared facilities. And then it's once or twice a week, everyone who wants to comes together and has dinner. There's it's on the water. So there's a kind of shared boathouse with all different boats and things that the community and the building shares. For when people come, so when we go and visit in Denmark, there's 2 spare apartments, and so you pay it's $50 a night or something. We'll go for 2 weeks, when we can travel again, and we can just rent one of those shared apartments in the building, so there's space for guests, and it's actually structured exactly like this. So I'm
wow.
So
I'm going to check it out.
Yeah,
I think Denmark is also known for its progressive education system as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Our son Elliot they've got free childcare. It's not means tested like it is here. So
wow.
Free daycare. So Elliot went to daycare for the 6 months that we were there, because Katrina's Danish and Elliot's got a Danish passport too. And their schooling, university is all government funded. There's no university fees, which we had in Australia up until just before you and I went to uni. They started introducing all of the fees, and I think they've gone up even now. So
wow.
It's still a very kind of progressively structured society.
Do they speak Danish or English over there?
Danish is the native language, but they're all very good English speakers.
Okay, great.
I could spend 6 months there, and actually I met a friend of Katrine's who has lived in Denmark for 15 years and doesn't speak Danish, so he can play with just English there.
Wow. So I'm going to start to touch on something that may be a bit more personal, because usually when I see people going through an awakening journey, it's triggered by some financial crisis and either relationship breakdown, health crisis, or a death of a loved one. So for you, you've got obviously the business that has grown. And even when you mentioned that it wasn't successful, we place so much meaning over certain terms, because if you look at overall as a whole, and I look at you and I look at everything that's done, I see nothing but success. But we take the snapshot of what happened at the very end to say that, well, it wasn't successful. But then what about the 90-95%? There's so many boxes has been ticked, really well executed, a lot of milestone that most business can only dream about that you guys have achieved. So really kudos to you guys. And I'm sure in the relationship part with Jody, the same thing as well. There's a lot of things that were fantastic that worked really well. So with the relationship, what are some of the lessons that has come out that you think, help you evolve as a person?
Yeah, for Jody and I there were 3 co-founders in the business, myself, Jody and Mike Knapp. So Jody and I were married when we started Shoes of Prey. And then about 4 years into the life of Shoes of Prey, we divorced. but still stayed working together for the next 6 years and also stayed close friends. The journey for us, we kind of met at 20 and 21. We're both very young, married at 24 and 25, started Shoes of Prey at, I think maybe 25 and 26, and then separated around the age of 30. So we'd kind of been together for nearly 10 years and just kind of grew in different directions in our 20s, but only from the marriage front. We were still really good business partners, we were still really good friends. And we were able to sort of keep those two pieces working even after we separated on the marriage front. I think for us, it was, working in the business together, it definitely it made some challenges in our marriage, but that wasn't really the specific reason that we broke up. It was more just, kind of changing goals and values and things that we wanted out of life that we sort of changed for each of us in our 20s and changed in different directions. And so we were able to keep working together well and stayed friends. And we still chat every couple of weeks. We'll have a call together. And
how do you think you have evolved through the process?
I think it was definitely that achieving that outcome was definitely not easy. Like, that was challenging. So I think I learned a lot of good interpersonal relationship skills through all of that. And it definitely takes two people to make that work. Like, I think, most marriage divorces end up, not on friendly terms, maybe acrimonious or somewhere in the middle. I don't think there's too many that end up there's some, but not too many where people end up being good friends. So I think for that to work, it's got to take both sides. So I think I'm thankful that Jody came at it with we had the same mindset going into the sort of separation. And we both kind of worked on it actively together. Like, we wanted to stay friends, we wanted to stay business partners, even though the marriage was breaking up. So the kinds of things that we did through that and the things that I learned from, like, we did a lot of marriage counseling towards the end of our relationship to try and see, what the issues were and understand them and see if they were fixable. And when we worked out that they weren't, I think having gone through that exercise together and that journey together, we had a lot of mutual respect for each other out of how we both dealt with that situation of going through the marriage counseling. Then when we decided to separate, we put kind of structures in place. And these were all tricky things to navigate at the time, but it's like, I stayed in the apartment that we'd been in. Jody moved out. She actually moved out into an apartment next door. So we kind of did have literally across
apartments.
So we were in apartments, but apart, but not fully apart. And so then we had rules around, okay, well, if we started to see other people, how was that going to work, given that we lived in the same
communication
building? And then Friday drinks, would you bring your new partner into the office? Like, we had all kinds of things like that we worked through, and working on that together and coming up with mutually agreeable conclusions was all good exercises in interpersonal relationships. And I think learned a lot of good things, how to navigate tricky emotional experiences like that, but in a way that works for everybody.
Are you familiar with the term conscious uncoupling?
Yeah. I think that's a great term. Like, that describes it really well. Yeah.
And I think, again, it's one of the paradigm that we've grown up in. The fairy tale stories, like, live happily ever after. And even with the wedding vows, like, for the good and the bad and death do us part. Well, most of the time when you get together with someone, what do you want from this? You want the other person to be happy. But when the other person is not happy, well, we sign a contract. You need to lock into this contract. Like, who's to say that the way that the normalcy works is maybe certain people are here for a season, a reason, or maybe some are forever. But the meaning that the society placed upon it, that if we separate is bad. Oh, I'm so sorry. But if we and you, like, after this podcast, we say bye, we say, oh my God, that's so bad. This shouldn't have happened. There was a failure. No, the separation is kind of normal. Like, there's always a beginning and there's an end, and sometimes that we may have a longer duration together, but at a certain stage we all go through death as well. There's always an ending, but it's just those extra meaning that we're placed upon it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And you go into a marriage, hoping that that's going to be how it plays out, and it's going to be forever. But if it's not, and it doesn't make sense for both people, that's. I don't view and nor does Jody view our marriage as a failure in any way. I think it was a great 10 years, and we both, we just grew in separate directions, and now we've both got new partners, we've both got kids, we're both really happy, we're still good friends, we still chat. It's like kind of
Wow.
result. Yeah, no
And
regrets
and
whatsoever.
these are the prime examples of really bucking the trend of how things can be, and it doesn't need to be like divorce doesn't need to be ugly and fighting in the courtrooms.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also funny, like you marry someone because you've got this amazing connection with them and this amazing relationship with, for a relationship to go from that to like battling it out in the courtroom, like is such a paradigm shift. It feels like that should be less normal than going from being married to being friends. That's a smaller shift. Yet I think the fighting in the courtroom, I feel like that happens more than the conscious uncoupling. And I get like it can't always work. Like I think if, you know, it was a conscious uncoupling, that it was a mutual conscious uncoupling for both of us. We both agreed to separate and we both agreed with that decision. I think in case, I get where if it was a marriage where one party wanted to separate and the other didn't, that would make it harder and there'd be emotional challenges with that. Or if one party cheated on the other and that was the reason for the breakup, that would make it hard. So I get that and certainly in my experience, I've had friendships that have broken down where I wanted to maintain the friendship but the other person didn't, or you need both parties to want to take that path, and I think you can't always control that as an individual. But yeah, when it can work, I'm thankful that Jody had a similar mindset to it with me, and we were able to make that work in a nice way.
Cool. So, in the peak of a lot of the difficult situations in your marriage, and also in when you had to let 200 people go in your team, are there certain strategies or tactics you resolve to kind of like keep yourself sane, keep yourself calm, keep yourself at peace?
Yeah, good question. I mean, those things were obviously incredibly hard. I think the things that I tried to do, it certainly still didn't make it easy by any means, but I guess helped me to kind of work through it. I guess in actually probably Shoes of Prey coming to an end was kind of timed with the birth of my first child, Elliot. And that had its challenges because I had a new baby and was like trying to do some pretty hard pivots in a business and having to let people go and things like that. And it's hard doing that when you're not sleeping properly because you've got a new baby, all of that. But I think in a lot of ways it helped because it put life into perspective. It helped me to be able to sit down at the end of the day or even at the start of the day and realize that I should be thankful for, I actually had so many good things going on in my life to be thankful for. Like I had a healthy son. My wife was happy. We lived near the beach in Los Angeles. There were so many things I could be thankful for, even though the business was going the wrong way. And today I have to let go of 20 people, like sucks more than anything. But I've still got my son's healthy, like my wife's healthy. I've got all these other things I can be thankful for and grateful for. So I think focusing on what the good things were in life and what I could be thankful for was a big one. For me, the beach is like this very meditative place that I can go to and just feel be in the present as opposed to thinking about the future or the past. And so we lived by the beach in LA. So when things were hard, like in the morning, I'd wake up at 6 a.m. and just go sit on the beach for half an hour and look out at the ocean. And that was my good kind of good mindfulness sort of period of time, I guess. So I found that really helpful. We now live on the Sunshine Coast. The beach is literally 100 meters that way. Now just thinking about it, I haven't gone for a swim today. So as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to go out to the beach and have a swim. And I just feel so good doing that. So I think the gratefulness, mindfulness, and then probably the third piece was, kind of empathy and like trying to still do my best through a painful period of thinking about and helping other people. So, laying off 200 people obviously sucks and is not what you want to do, but trying to do that in the best way that I possibly could for those people. So, we had a lot of Australians working for us in LA. Their visas were tied to working for Shoes of Prey. So when we let them go, they only had 60 days left in the country to either leave or find another job, which is, very stressful. You've just lost your job and you've lost your visa to be in the country. You might have to lose your apartment, move out of the country. All of those sort of things make it even more challenging. So, we couldn't not let people go. We had no choice, but we did all the research to understand exactly how the visa rules worked so that we could explain that and have a couple of page summary of how that all worked for people and what their options were. We went and talked to other companies that we knew in LA that we knew were hiring for different roles. So we could say, obviously go take the time to work out what you want to do. But if you want to stay in LA, we've got these introductions for you and these companies that are interested in hiring people in your role. So just let us know if you want those introductions. offers, we said anyone who wants a reference letter or needs reference checks done, all of those things we're obviously very happy to do. And yeah, every one of the people in LA that we let go managed to, if they wanted to stay in the US, they found another job in time.
Wow.
Or if they wanted to move back to Australia or go to Europe or do something different, they did that. And yeah, we're 6 full-time people in Fable. 3 of us are ex-Shoes of Prey. So 2 of the team that I had to make redundant in Shoes of Prey now work in Fable. And it helped me to get through that period. I felt good, and it made it less difficult for me, which is, that's kind of ended up being a selfish thing, to do that, to lay people off in the most empathetic way that I could. So yeah, I'd say the gratefulness, the mindfulness, and the empathy and wanting to help other people were the things that got me through it.
Awesome. So what a beautiful journey that you've gone on over the last 20 plus years. If there is one thing that you can go back to tell your 21-year-old version of yourself, what would you say to yourself?
That's a good question. I've got 2 answers. One is a purely business learning out of Shoes of Prey. And then the other is trying to encourage that awakening earlier. So I think probably the biggest thing I would say to myself, my 20-year-old self, would be try and work out, actually in school and university, maybe even don't go to university, or at least spend some time traveling the world, find out what you're deeply truly passionate about and what you're excited to do, as opposed to just following society's journey of finishing high school, getting good grades, going to university, getting good grades, getting a job at a law firm, all the things that I did, just following society's path for you. I would tell myself, go back and find your own path and your own journey and what you're passionate about. Yeah, and I'd try and spark that awakening in me earlier in my life.
Wow. And for parents, obviously, they would, if you don't go to university, you didn't do law, maybe you wouldn't have the success. And so what would you say to people that, well, if I take that path, what if we're going to be a bum somewhere and just be a backpacker and nothing eventuate?
That's a really good question, and I need to spend more time thinking about this, because I love what you're doing with the homeschooling and not necessarily following the curriculum and really doing that for your kids. I think I'm not quite I need to spend more time thinking about it. I haven't thought about it enough. I'm not quite at that level. I'm at the level of the Montessori school where I still feel and I don't know if it's because it's the right thing to do, or if it's still society's impact that is the right path on me, that I'm okay, well, maybe the happy medium is a Montessori school where they still follow that path, but in a more I need to spend more time.
I think what you're doing is perfect. When I first started on the journey, I used to have judgment over school that, hey, you know what, exactly what you say, they ring the bell at a certain time, you get punished for making mistakes, whereas entrepreneur, you need to make mistakes and not afraid of it. So all the things that's wrong with it. But then when I started the homeschooling journey, geez, I'm glad that's school, because the kids can drive you insane. They don't stay in control. They're not in that mode unless you put the very authoritative, using fear to indoctrinate them. Otherwise, they don't stay in your box. And it can drive most parents insane. And so this is good. It's keeping a lot of people out of mental health institute by kids going to school. So everything it suits a purpose. And we've seen you came out of school, I came out of school. There's a lot of things that can come out of school to experience the duality of life, of control. But then you kind of wake up from that. But we've never been asleep, then there's nothing to wake up to. But at the same time, if we have a choice, we kind of want them to have that freedom of adventure and discover themselves. So that's why I don't know what their exact path is, whether it's them to be asleep first and then waking up, or they're going to be awake the whole time. I'll just let it be. And there's something that's been a bit of reassuring to me, is that seeing certain siblings within the same family grew up a certain way, even twins, but then the way that they turn out is completely different. Yeah. So us parents, normally we think that we have more control than what we actually have. But the reality is that how much control do we really have? Is we can influence, but if their path is going to go a certain way, we've seen certain people rebel, they did a law degree, they did doctor, and then end up quitting that and do a 180 to do something else.
Yeah. No, 100%. And it's a good point too. I don't know. I'm happy with where my life has ended up and had I not have followed that structured path, would it have been the same? I feel pretty confident that, I would have still ended up in a good place, maybe even a better place, maybe even have had these epiphanies sooner had I have, even I was so like focused on following that path that, I didn't take a year off between high school and university, or, I traveled in like my summer holidays from uni, but I could have done way more of that sort of stuff and going out and discovering the world. And just the experience that I had in the 6 months in Denmark that I took off, and the amount that I learnt and grew, and the kind of, epiphanies and realizations that I had in that period, like, I definitely should have done that sooner, and it would have only been a positive thing.
Yeah, that worldly view, you just can't buy from books and some of these things. Like, and one of the things my wife and I have been talking about is I just want to sleep on the street like one day with them, because you can logic, hey, look, like you don't want to be on the street, but until you sleep there, like you don't know how difficult it is, and these are like priceless memories that you probably remember for the rest of your life.
No, 100%. And I think actually like learning to be, even if you take a purely like normal society driven success metrics of like being a successful financial outcome out of being an entrepreneur, like high school and university doesn't teach you those skills properly. Like you said before, getting in trouble in high school for doing the wrong thing, like being an entrepreneur is all about making mistakes and learning from them fast, but you don't want to be fearful of those mistakes, or you're not going to have the same rate of learning. Like even with Shoes of Prey, like as much as I would have wanted a different outcome, I think the highest rates of learning that I had were in the hardest periods when things weren't going well. Like I learned so much in those last 2 years when we were struggling, and you kind of need those periods of failure. At least in my experience, I learned a lot from that. And the structure in high school and university doesn't really give you the opportunity to do those kind of big crazy experiments. I feel like I could have learnt more faster about entrepreneurship by just getting straight into it earlier.
Yeah, on one of my tabs right now, I've got this program called Kidspreneur. It's a pretty good program that just like walk them through how to be an entrepreneur, like from lemonade stand to come out with why should people buy from you, why should you set your price of certain things. So it's pretty cool.
That's great. And actually, like, I think in our society today, we've got the opportunity to go and do that. Like when we were going through high school and university, we didn't have the internet. So the best place to go and learn probably was high school and university, because there wasn't other options. But now there's so many good books. There's so much information available on the internet. There's like kidpreneur programs like you're talking about that exist on the internet. Like that didn't exist before. And so I think now society's evolved enough that there are all these other amazing ways and opportunities to learn. Like I imagine for you doing homeschooling, there's a lot more support for how to structure that than there was 30 years ago when we were at school. So I think maybe when we went through the path we took probably was closer to the right one, but that's not necessarily the case now.
Yeah, it's a changing world. So lastly, I guess for people that's gone through COVID, there's a lot of business that's heavily affected by it based on the business model, and emotions are running high for some of them. What are some of the wisdom and advice that you can give to some of the business going through challenges right now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the most challenging kind of work periods that I went through were those tough last few years of Shoes of Prey. And really feel for anyone who's going through something similar at the moment. And I know a lot of businesses and people are. And I think the things that worked for me going through that period and helped me to come out the other side were, just those ideas of finding the things that you can be grateful for each day, focusing on the things that you have control over. So it's easy to fall into the trap of getting upset about things that you can't control, but you literally, if you can't control something, that's kind of just negative thoughts with no benefit. Like focusing on the present and the things that you can control is important. Working out what you can be grateful for, working out where you can focus on the present and be mindful. For me, that's the beach. So finding equivalents for yourself, and then thinking about the people around you and how you can be empathetic and helpful, because that sort of comes around and benefits you. And then for me, that experience of taking the 6 months off post of Shoes of Prey, like I've said it multiple times, one of the best things I did in my life. Like for a lot of people who are forced out of work at the moment, I mean, I was in the same situation with Shoes of Prey. Like I had to shut the business down and I was out of a job, had to leave the US because I wasn't ready to go back to work. So my 60-day visa expired, had a 7-month pregnant wife. We had to leave the country and go work out where in the world we were going to have our baby. We didn't have health insurance in Australia, so Katrine's Danish, so we were kind of forced to go to Denmark. We did the things that we could control and found we're lucky that Katrine's parents, we could go stay with them in Copenhagen for the 6 months. And then, that's 6 months off, just not thinking through what I was going to do next, just actually taking the time to have a break. If people are finding themselves out of work or in a similar situation, I can thoroughly recommend doing that. And actually, I wrote a blog post at the start of this year titled 2019, the best year of my life. And it genuinely was. Like, I went from 2017 was hard, the first half of 2018, up there with the hardest 6 months of my life, letting 200 people go, shutting down the business, leaving the US. So I went from one of the worst periods of my life to having the second half of 2018 off, setting myself up for then working on what I'm working now and living where I want to live, near family, up here on the Sunshine Coast, near the beach, which I love. Young kids, which I'm loving being a parent, and working on something that I'm truly passionate about. And literally that 6 months off turned me around from the hardest period of my life to 2019, which was the best year of my life. And I'd say this year's been on par so far with 2019.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like what you just said is symbolic of what being an awakened entrepreneur is. As an entrepreneur in the past, it's like you just go with what's logical. Who would ever dare to say that with the business collapse will signal that will trigger the best period of your life and something even getting better and better? But yet in the whole divine plan, being a heart-driven entrepreneur, awakened entrepreneur, you go with your intuition, you just go with the flow of life. And sometimes it leads to, well, not just sometimes, a lot of the times it leads to something even more beautiful. Our ego self cannot even imagine, because no one would dare to think that like a business collapse would trigger something that is so beautiful. Same thing for me, like existential crisis, and for a lot of people, the awakened entrepreneur, we didn't choose this path consciously to say that we want something seemingly negative to happen. But like what you said so beautifully, it is what it is, and you, if you can't control it, just there's no point like drilling over it. Just focus on what you're grateful for, focus on what you want to do moving forward.
Yeah. And I think the other big epiphany for me through it all too was I think my perspectives on how much money I needed to be happy changed. I think I had in my mind, I want to do Shoes of Prey, and if I can cash out like 20 million bucks, then I'll, have the nice house and the nice car and be able to travel first class. But then I realized, like, we shut Shoes of Prey down. I spent 10 years working on a far below market salary for what I could have got paid elsewhere, and I didn't cash anything out because we closed the business down. So, and there's some like luck in and support from family, like being able to go and live in Katrine's parents' house, for example. And then when we came back to Australia, we spent a couple of months living at my mum and stepdad have an apartment in Brisbane and then a house on the Sunshine Coast. So we just went and lived in their kind of beach house on the sort of weekender on the Sunshine Coast. So we're very lucky to have that support, and I know not everyone has that. But the equivalent and a path we could have taken would be to go and just rent a house rent a really nice house for a couple of $100 a week in a small country town and take the time off to do that. And that 6 months was amazing. We're now living on the Sunshine Coast, just renting a house here near the beach. It's not expensive living here. Cost of living is really low, and I'm the happiest I've ever been. Like, I've come to the realization that you don't need a lot of money to be happy. It's actually not, this sounds so cliched. It's not money that drives happiness, but it's genuinely not. For me, it's the young family is great. Living by the beach is great. Working on something I'm passionate about is great. Having family and close friends living nearby is great. That's the things that make me happy. And that's in the reach of most people to go out and create. You've got to think it through and plan it out and make it happen, go and execute it. But that should be within the reach of what most people can do.
Yeah, and yet I think in the current dilemma is that the illusion that's been created is that money equals happiness. And definitely for myself growing up, and all the people that's kind of got there to hit their financial goal, or at least tasted what that lifestyle is like, can tell you that, no, it doesn't. Yeah. And then certain people say, oh, you just don't know how to spend the money. But with money, like most people tell you that even with the lifestyle, you'll come with a different set of problems, and you call it first world problem, but inside it feels like just as difficult as someone that's actually fighting for rent. But it all balances out, because those people, that some of them may have really like great relationship with the kids or something that they can hang on to. So I think overall, the more people can start to experience life, similar to like COVID, it forced a lot of people to stay at home and to be by themselves and start doing and realize that, you know what, like all the shopping that I'm doing, like who am I dressed up for? Well, I got my fancy car. Who am I showing it off to? I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. Well, actually, I can just wear my pajamas, my track pants all day. So I don't need to buy as much. Maybe I don't need to earn as much. Yeah. And the pressure goes down and everything kind of flows. Maybe I can enjoy life now.
Yeah. We had an epiphany with holidays. Like we've always done lots of international travel. And this year we were supposed to go to a 40th birthday party for a week in Bali. And then we had a wedding in Hawaii and a wedding 2 weeks later in Toronto. So we had these 2 big overseas trips planned that obviously got cancelled. So we bought it. I mean, we've been lucky in Queensland. We haven't been locked down. This would be harder in Victoria. But 3 months ago, we bought a caravan and just a secondhand caravan, $14,000, not expensive. And we've just been every 3 or 4 weekends, we go out and stay in a different caravan park somewhere in southeast Queensland. And yeah, it's my wife and the 2 kids. We all sleep in this little caravan together, cook up a little barbecue, explore a new beach somewhere in Queensland, or we stayed on a farm last weekend. Actually, it was an old dairy farm that's been converted into a campsite with some friends, and those experiences have been actually probably better than it would have been. It would have been amazing going into these weddings overseas, obviously, but these have also been just amazing experiences that we've had with the kids, and it's
priceless.
You're not doing that hardcore traveling overseas. Just driving somewhere in a caravan is nice and simple, and it's a lot cheaper, and yeah, exactly, priceless experiences.
It's one of my dreams to get in a camper van or RV of some type and go around as a family. Just need to learn how to empty the poop and
That's it. Yeah. It's great. I can highly recommend it. Yeah, we're sort of building up to doing bigger trips. So we've done like some 4-day trips, and we're actually thinking of if we could. I mean, you're doing homeschooling, so that could be even easier. But yeah, we've been thinking of we go to a week somewhere and maybe hiring a nanny or someone to help look after the kids, so we can kind of keep working on the weekdays while we're staying somewhere different.
Man, like, have you seen the ad for someone that did like for au pair or someone? Like, it'd be great for them to like go backpacking, or not backpacking, but travel together with you guys and spend time with the kids. It's a dream job, and you'll probably get hundreds of applicants, if not thousands.
Yeah, no, that's good. That would be great. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to keeping in touch with you. How do people like stay following you and seeing your progress of your business and your life?
Yeah, so for Fable, at Fable Food Co on Instagram is where we're the most active, and then fablefood.co is our website URL. And if you want to try the product in Woolworths, in the refrigerated meat alternative section near the meat, you can find our plant-based beef. And then for me personally, LinkedIn, Michael Fox Fable, search me there, or same on Twitter, and actually Instagram. I'm sort of reasonably active on all those 3. But yeah, it's been awesome chatting to you, Gary. Great catching up. I've always loved our conversations, thoroughly enjoyed this one. And yeah, if you come up to Queensland sometime and we'll hang out, it'd be great to chat more. I love the way you think about all of these things, and I really love your journey. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Definitely. I love the Sunshine Coast from Waihee. So when the border opens up, I'm sure we'll come up, make our way up there.
Please do. That'll be great.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Gary.